write it off because you already know everything, right? When you've studied a lot about finance and about investing and about money, you kind of work with the assumption, wake up with the assumption every day that you understand money. Really, as a financial advisor for 5 years before I ever understood money. Charade and a big facade from the government that they're still keeping things in control. I think they're in a lot less control than they lead us to believe. You should start your Bitcoin allocation as insurance against default on your bond portfolio.
Well, I am happy to be speaking with you today, my new friend, my new anonymous friend. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So my new friend here, yeah, great. So my new friend here, who we're calling Plate, is a pseudo-anonymous person online. You are a financial advisor or financial consultant of some kind in Canada, if we can say that. And you are a part of a Bitcoin conference in Toronto here coming up soon. So if I have all that right, otherwise correct me. But I'm looking forward to hearing about the conference. I'm looking forward to hearing about what you do. Yeah. So great. So I got that right?
Yeah. That's all perfect. Yeah. I guess the Bitcoin, or my Bitcoin genesis story. Yeah. So I first heard about Bitcoin a long time ago, like most people. I guess like probably 2013 or something like that. And it was actually a little like a little train newspaper going into Toronto, and it said something about I think it was Mount Gox or Silk Road at the time or something like that had been broken up by the law enforcement and everything like that. And so that was my first kind of hearing about it. I thought, oh, that sounds interesting, okay, but didn't take any action, of course. And then probably about a year later, I had a friend who approached me and said, hey, let's mine Bitcoin. At the time, I was probably like 19 or maybe 20 or something like that. And so I thought, well, that's too risky. I barely have any money. I can't, risk it on something. I'm bad enough with computers already as it is without trying to do something as fancy as mining Bitcoin. I don't even know what it is. So wrote it off again. Around that time, I fell into the book by Milton Friedman, Free to Choose. I actually thought it was a book about picking stocks at the time, which I was into. So my referral to that book misled me. So then I read it and then kind of realized that the government is at the root of a lot of our problems. So that was a big mindset shift for me at that point. Then I started my role as a financial advisor in 2015. Basically, the way I explain that role, because it's not really like kind of helping, it's not at a bank, it's not helping people with their investments. It's more high net worth investors. So I describe it to my friends. I just say I help rich people avoid paying taxes. That's really the main thing of my goal, or of my job description. So I started doing that, and then that's when I started learning a lot more about the economy, about taxes, about finance, and everything like that. Then in probably 2017, I guess, in the big bull run, then our company actually put out an official communication because so many clients were asking about Bitcoin and saying like, oh, should I invest in Bitcoin? So they put out an official communication to kind of coach us into how to handle that question. And essentially, they looped it in with pot stocks at the time and said it's just speculation. It's another tulip craze. Tell clients that there's nothing backing Bitcoin and it's worthless, and you don't want to get caught up in it. Now, me at the time, I believed it too, right? And I told a couple clients that, and I said, yeah, you don't want to buy Bitcoin, blah blah blah, right? So again, that's now a third time that I've missed out on Bitcoin. So it wasn't until October of 2020, in lockdown, when the discount brokerage app that I was using for stock picking on my phone, just for fun essentially, started offering Bitcoin. So then I bought some. I put $100 into Bitcoin, and I think like the next day or that day even, it went up to like 105 or something like that. So it's my position now that has the biggest gain on it within like a couple hours. So pretty much right away I said, okay, I think I got to start learning more about this. Maybe there is something to this. Because now that you own it and now that you've made some money, now you're the smart one, right? Right. So now it's like, okay, now I can put aside my, my ego and actually learn about this stuff. And one thing led to another, going down YouTube, the YouTube rabbit hole leads you to Twitter, leads you to kind of meeting a lot of people. Early 2021, I eventually decided, okay, I need to meet Bitcoiners in person because I didn't know any. None of my friends knew anything about Bitcoin or cared. So then I kind of just said, you know what, screw it. I'm going to start my own meetup and organize my own meetup. So I did that in Hamilton, Ontario. And I didn't really know exactly what a meetup meant. So it kind of just ended up being like a party. So it's like a bunch of Bitcoiners, but there was like sponsors who covered the food and the booze. So it really ended up being like a big party basically with a bunch of Bitcoiners. But that was a lot of fun, and I kind of met a lot of people. And that's where I met Dan and Manuela, who are a couple. And Manuela is an event planner, and Dan is a Bitcoin maxi. And he said, we want to go out on our own and start our own conference, but we need some cred in with the Bitcoin crowd because these people are apprehensive about trusting newcomers. So even though I was a newcomer myself at the time, I had a little bit of street cred just having organized a couple meetups. And then it's kind of took off from there. I'm still doing both roles, right? So I'm still a financial advisor for 9 to 5 during the week. And then with the conference, basically I just tweet about it. I like to say I'm like their hype man, essentially. I did run their Twitter account, but then I had another baby, so it's like a little busy to run their Twitter account while I'm already addicted to running my Twitter account. But yeah, that's basically what I'm doing, and then helping out there with them however I can.
In some ways, it's very similar to mine, and it's especially similar to other financial advisors and traditional finance folks I've heard from. Being that first, you kind of ignore it, that first stage, just because it's like, whatever, who cares? Then all of a sudden, it becomes something that you do think about a little bit, but it's like, no way. Like, this can't possibly be what we think it, what people claim it is. This can't vote. About at the same time, I don't think I heard of it in 2013 like you did. Perhaps I did, but I don't recall hearing it. And I try to remember, but I don't think I did. I think the first time I heard of it was probably 2017. And I immediately jumped to that same conclusion that you had. That I thought, whatever, it's just speculation. It's just numbers on a screen. And yeah, stocks are numbers on a screen. But, at least those numbers have regulations and cash flows and all this other stuff. But really, similar to you, about that same time, late 2020, early 2021, was when I was like, okay, maybe there's something more to this. So that's quite funny that we were along the same path there, both in our timeline and our thought process. And, I've been very in online, face-to-face like this. And it's amazing me how almost every single one, that's like the same story, that I ignored it, and then I thought it was dumb, and then I started looking into it, and I just kept asking myself if I'm crazy, and how could I be wrong, and now here we are, and we're on this call, and anyway, it's fascinating to hear that, and so, although, even though we have those similarities, there's a big difference with you, and my question for you, that most people may not be able to answer to, is that you were going through this process as a financial advisor. Most of us, people like me, people older or younger than me, we go through this and we're not talking with clients. We don't have that position of authority that people look to for input, especially high net worth people or people with assets that, as you say, are trying to avoid taxes and unnecessary expenses. Your ego. In what ways did you have to kill your ego? And what ways was that an awakening for you in realizing that I'm advising people with their finances, and I just accepted what my company or whatever it is that gave you that letter. I just I'm curious to hear that process from that unique vantage point there, if you can speak to that.
Yeah. So I guess just to start on the ego side, as most of us all do, whether we know it or not. I think that basically when you learn something new um, for the first time, or you learn about something new, you you write it off because you already know everything, right? When you've studied a lot about finance and about investing and about money, you kind of work with the assumption, wake up with the assumption every day that you understand money. Um, Really, as a financial advisor for 5 years before I ever understood money, because I understood, the fiat system around money, right? That was created over years and years to enable fiat money to, work a little longer. So it wasn't really until discovering Bitcoin, reading Saifedean's book, that really knowing, okay, well, money is money, not because government says it is, but because there are certain properties that humans naturally gravitate to. So I think just the ego of thinking you already know it, then you think, okay, well, this isn't worth my time. I'm busy enough. I don't need to learn something else because I already know how money works. So I think in my case, it actually took putting some money in it for fun, um, to see it go up in value, to actually realize, okay, maybe this does have something to it. So it's funny how just making a little money on a trade can change your ego around a little bit. And then as far as advising people about it, it really became really scary because in 2020 and early 2021, rates were zero, right? And most of my clients are seniors, right? So my clients are usually 65 plus. They have zero Bitcoin. They have 70 to 90% bonds. And they're diversified bond portfolios, right? Like people tend to think that when you're talking about bonds, they're looking at TLT, right? At the long dated treasuries, and thinking like, okay, well, your bond clients must have, lost all their money or most of their money last year. But really it's diversified, right? So most money managers kind of worth their salt, would diversify with their duration, have some long bonds, but mostly shorter term bonds because basically when interest rates go up, as everybody knew they eventually would, a little bit at least, long bonds get killed, right? Whereas short term bonds aren't hurt near as bad. But still, that said, I knew that I had clients with millions of dollars in bonds, right? So it was kind of like, okay, how do I go about getting some of these people to at least have some Bitcoin allocation? And it's still something I struggle with all the time because there's several aspects to orange pilling from a position of a financial advisor, because they have to understand the problem and the solution, right, which is very hard to explain to like a normie in the first place. B, you have to have the time in the day to explain to these people, right? So these people don't necessarily want to learn something new either. They also have their egos, where they don't want to learn something new and change the way they've invested for the past 50 years. And then there's even the person, or not the professional responsibility of, okay, I got this 72-year-old lady to put some Bitcoin into cold storage, even though I know that there are scammers rampant trying to separate people from their Bitcoin, and specifically targeting seniors who are kind of less likely to recognize a scam like this. So it's really something I always struggle with. I have orange pilled I think about 14 of my clients, to have some Bitcoin allocation, but it's very small. Like I usually say, I say 1 to 5%. 5% if you're like a very aggressive investor who's okay with high volatility. And the big reason is most of these people they're high net worth, but that doesn't mean they have all the money in the world and they're never having zero risk of running out of money. A lot of people don't realize that if you're 65 and you have 500,000 or $1 million, it's not that much money, really. People think that's a lot. It's really not that much. $1 million, if it's all in Bitcoin and you spend 80 grand a year, if Bitcoin takes an 85% dip, and then you spend 80 grand that year, you're really putting your retirement at risk. So you really, people think there's no case for bonds anymore. There is still a case for bonds, because when you're retired and there's no income besides what you have for your investments, you really can't handle the volatility. So I still recommend small allocations, and even still with most of my clients, it's really hard to bring up the topic and to follow through with it anyways.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. That, especially what you said there at the end, that one doesn't have to go all in, quote unquote. I think Bitcoiners are infamous for hating bonds, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. However, at the same time, it's like so often what I try to emphasize on my social media, what other Bitcoiners try to emphasize, is that you don't have to do a Michael Saylor. You don't have to go all in and take all this debt. You don't have to have such the high allocation. But the thing for me that I'm pounding the table at right now is that even though someone doesn't have to go all in, to me, in my worldview, it's inexcusable at this point to have a 0% allocation. Because if this thing is correct, and perhaps you would disagree with me or have something to add here, but my view is that if this thing is correct, then eventually everyone will need to be all in, because there'll just be nothing else. In the same way that everyone is all in the internet or all in the car or the light bulb, and these inferior technologies no longer exist, if Bitcoin is correct, then eventually, yeah, everyone will have a vast majority of their net worth and their purchasing power and the monetary energy stored in the superior monetary battery of the human race, which is Bitcoin. And so if that's the case, then some small allocation is necessary. And I think that's hard for people to understand, that just because the Bitcoin thesis is that it takes over everything, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to reallocate everything to it right now. Eventually, you'll probably have to, evolutionary events that dwarf today's events. But yeah, I think that's a really good emphasis that you have there. So I'm curious, of all the asset classes out there, where would you rank your favorite to least favorite? So you have real estate, you have gold, bonds, obviously, you have stocks, and then Bitcoin. Maybe fine art if you want to throw in there, or cash. Where would you rate on the spectrum? For me personally, I prefer stocks or real estate much more than bonds for a variety of reasons that I've explained on other of my shows. But I'm curious what your take is on that.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be different for every life stage. For when do you need the money? How much money do you need? Right, and all those kind of financial planning questions. So I think the answer is very different for a 60-year-old than it is for a 30-year-old. So if you're asking me, if I'm going to talk to another young person, and I'm assuming most of the people listening to your podcast are probably younger people, I think Bitcoin is number one. I think number two is rental real estate, and the reason I say that is just because of the massive leverage. If you want to put the minimum down payment down, I think you need the mortgage for it to make sense. Because yes, rates are whatever 5.5% now. I don't think they're going to be that way for long, right? Maybe another couple of years or something like that. But I do think they will go down. It's really hard. Like, you can look at every asset class in the world. None of them are paying your mortgage down to zero over 25 years. But your renters are. So that's not for everybody either, just because there's a lot of work involved with rental real estate. When the basement floods and you have no tenant in the basement for 3 months in a row, that's like a good situation where people say stay humble and stack sats. Is buying rental real estate is not staying humble and stacking sats, and the reason people say that's bad is because when something goes wrong, if you're forced to sell at a loss, you might be, cutting into your Bitcoin stack. So if you can stomach the risk of rental real estate, because you can also get bad tenants who just decide not to pay for months and months, right? Depending on what jurisdiction you're in, it can be really hard. Where I'm in Ontario, it's very hard to kick renters out. So that's what I would say is number two. I like to say there is no second best, but if there was one, it'd be rental real estate. So I like real estate for that reason, and also depending on where you live, like where I live, kind of like maybe 40 minutes from Toronto, to where you live in Windsor along the 401 corridor is the name of the highway that runs there. Um, 30 or no, I think it's actually 50% of Canada's population runs along that highway, and it's just a 4-hour drive to get from one end all to the other, right? So Canada's a huge country, but all of the big cities are around the Great Lakes and are around the 401. And guess what? There's like I believe 1 million new Canadians who come to the country every year, whether they're students or moving to Canada, immigrating. They're not building new real estate anywhere close to fast enough. So I think real estate is a decent investment, but the only way it comes up to all the way to number two is because of that leverage. So I want if I'm going to buy real estate, I want to put 5% down, which is the minimum in Canada. So that way you have 20x leverage on an asset that is kind of, in my mind, guaranteed to go up over the long run, kind of like Bitcoin. But just with that caveat that you need to be able to handle the stress. You need to be kind of handy with a hammer if something breaks, things like that. And you need to vet your tenants, right? Get some good tenants. Third, after real estate for a young person, I would say stocks. I'm bullish stocks even right through hyper Bitcoinization as well. I personally don't own any. I'm 100% Bitcoin. But I wouldn't think that it's a terrible thing to be owning stocks. Because just like real estate, just like everything else, it's just going to be repriced using Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think Apple's going to go away. People are going to still need phones, right? People are still going to, buy groceries. People are still going to do all these things. It will look very different, I think, but I do think that stocks will still play a part. Are they going to be extremely volatile as we see this, hyperinflation over time? Yes. But I think that the right stocks will probably still do well under Bitcoin standard. Do I think I'm smart enough to pick the right stocks that will make it through the chaos of hyper Bitcoinization? No. Some people might be. I would probably wait and maybe buy stocks again later after the whole transition. But I'm still okay with stocks. I don't think they're terrible. I just think it's terrible compared to Bitcoin.
I guess what I would say about that is that I think you're right. It's just for those watching, we didn't script this all, we didn't plan this all, but it's funny because like that's the exact same ranking that I've given for the exact same reasons. That Bitcoin is number one, second best, would be real estate, but only if it has extreme leverage. And then stocks, and then bonds, cash, everything else, and then gold probably better than, or on par with stocks, or maybe just below. But anyway, that's fascinating because what makes real estate so good to everything else is that you can leverage the insanity of the governments of the world. The governments are the power to debase their underlying currencies so that their debts make a smaller and smaller share of their burdens, of their taxable revenues. And so, because you can basically leverage, with 4x or 10x or 20x leverage on real estate, you can take massive advantage of these repricings. And, I think that's something that Bitcoiners, that's a major disagreement I have with Bitcoiners actually, is that they say that, real estate is going to crash or the stocks are going to crash or whatever. And anyway, that's funny to hear. You think the S&P 500 will just continue to trade higher. I think real estate will just continue to trade higher. I know prices are absurd. I know valuations are absurd. But we have to consider what's the stronger asset and what's the weaker asset. The stock market or real estate, that's a stronger asset than cash for the exact reason that you said, that these companies exist and that the real estate exists, and that there's a shortage of real estate. And so these are stronger assets. And so even though I think they're good in comparison to the dollar, hundreds of times better, I think they fall short when compared to Bitcoin. Because even though those are stronger assets than cash. Bitcoin's a stronger asset than all those things. And so my thought process then is that if that's the case, that it will absorb most of that monetary premium in these stocks and in real estate. So in terms of real purchasing power, and they go down even further in purchasing power compared to Bitcoin by a factor of 10 or 100 or 1,000 even. So I'm curious, in regards to that and what I just said, what's your view on monetary premium? And where do you think monetary premium has been flowing the last couple of decades, and where do you think it's going to flow in regards to everything that we're talking about?
So I think it's kind of actually the same question, is just where's the monetary premium going to flow? Because I think it has been flowing obviously to real estate and to stocks, and to Bitcoin, I guess, but just in an overall view, not quite as much. Just Bitcoin's seen a lot of growth because it started very small, right? So I think obviously the end game is that it all flows to Bitcoin, right? But that said, I don't know how far away we are from that, right? I think it could be a long time before people, understand Bitcoin and place their money there and hold that instead of, trying to save in real estate or in stocks or different things like that. So I think it's kind of the same question in that way, that I think it's still that order, Bitcoin, levered real estate, and stocks. The other thing, when you mention that a lot of Bitcoiners really don't like real estate and think it's all going to crash and things like that, where I do agree with a lot of those guys is just the concept of real property rights and real ownership, because the only reason you own your rental property down the other side of the city is because the government lets you, right? If our governments are, if they default in June or whenever they might be defaulting, and if really the dollar does hyperinflate, it can't pay their bills anymore, and the government becomes a less powerful entity that can't really protect us anymore, or can't do anything anymore because they don't have the resources, then that rental property now belongs to your tenants, unless you kind of go over there with a baseball bat and be the goon to demand the rent still every month. Because if there's no one keeping track of credit scores, or if there's no government to evict them, then that's your job now. So that's kind of the caveat there too. Just I guess another potential risk. And when we look at timeline, it's like, okay, logically this timeline is like 30 years away. But you know what? I can believe Baljee's bet too, that it could be 90 days away too. I'm not the type of person who writes that off as completely unrealistic, because I think the main thing is that none of us can predict this accurately. Just like no one can pick which stock is going to do the best next year. No one knows the timeline that these things are going to take, because it's all a big charade and a big facade from the government that they're still keeping things in control. I think they're in a lot less control than they lead us to believe. So I think it could be soon, could be late. So I would just say to be careful with rental real estate for that reason as well. The other one I just want to touch on, it's kind of taking a step back, is the reason I like the leverage too is because of the inflation. If you look back in Weimar Germany, the people who made out the best, like bandits, were the ones with huge mortgages. Because when the currency inflates, your mortgage is based on that original dollar amount that you bought the house for. So a $1 million mortgage is a lot now, but if inflation stays at 10% for the next 10 years, that $1 million mortgage is like pennies, right? Especially if you have an income that can keep pace with inflation, right? So I always recommend people kind of get a job that's tied to things that also inflate in value. That's why I like the financial advisor role these days.
It's just interesting to hear that from a similar perspective. Yeah. So, okay, let me ask you something that's perhaps too specific, but I want to ask you nonetheless to see if you're able to answer. Let's say that I'm someone that is not young. We were talking about someone in their 30s or perhaps even younger like myself. What if I'm somebody that has a more typical allocation. Like, let's say I have a third of my net worth in bonds, a third of my net worth in stocks, and a third of my net worth in real estate, whether that's primary residence or residential, perhaps it doesn't matter. Obviously it does matter, but for the question, perhaps it doesn't. If that's me, and I'm hearing about this Bitcoin thing, I'm not really sure where to go, what to start, like, okay, maybe I should buy $100 worth, maybe I should sell everything for Bitcoin, but neither of those sounds right. Somewhere in the middle. What do you think is something that, and again, none of this is financial advice, and this is just ramblings of thought processes here. What do you think the average retiree that's maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s that is considering an allocation to Bitcoin, what do you think is something that is reasonable, and what do you think they should get rid of first? I know we've already talked about what's the best ranking of assets, but at the same time you thought bonds were perhaps of some use. So if you were that kind of person, or if you were just making an overly generalized statement, what do you think would be a legitimate percentage? Like literally $100, or like 10%, 5%, 30%? What do you think?
So where I start that conversation from is not so much from like the math perspective and the the science of investment management. It's more from the human perspective. I always like to say that there's two correct answers to every financial planning question, right? There's the correct answer from a math perspective, right? If a calculator is asking you, and then there's the correct answer for a human. So I would take the human angle for this one and basically say you should start your Bitcoin allocation as insurance against default on your bond portfolio. So then I'd be saying 1 to 3% of your bond portfolio to start, right? And then from there, if a cycle goes by, you see the high, you see the low, and you weren't really phased by it, you know what I mean? When you saw prices screaming higher, you weren't trapped by greed and selling everything you own and buying at the peak, because that's a bad scenario for people too, right? They see the price going up and then they start irresponsibly aping in. When you're near retirement, that can be very damaging for you to ape in near the top, and then things crash. So I'd say start there and then see how you can handle a cycle, right? If you get too scared and sell when Bitcoin drops 85%, I don't think you should really grow your allocation because you can't handle it. Now, if you can handle it, right, you can go 4 years, 5 years without doing anything irrational or anything damaging to your retirement. Then I'd say start growing it, right? I would say maybe take some of your stock portion from there. When you say real estate, it's tough to gauge real estate in that way, because if it's 33% real estate, if you're in Canada or in along that 401 corridor, that means you got $1 million in stocks, $1 million in real estate, $1 million in bonds, right? Because you're not really finding a house cheaper than $1 million bucks. So it's hard to pull from that allocation when it's just your principal residence. But yeah, I think I would be saying start with a small bond allocation and then start pulling from both the stock and the bond allocation. I think you do still need some bonds in there, especially if you're depending on like a steady stream of income. Just because if you get rid of the bonds completely, last year stocks and Bitcoin crashed almost at the same time. Because we had Bitcoin do poor for a lot of 2022. American stocks did really bad for most of 2022 as well. So if that's your whole liquid portfolio dropping, between 20 and 60%, and you need to take out 80 grand a year, that's really damaging. So I'd say take out of both for that reason, because you don't want to get rid of all your bonds if you're currently pulling an income from your investments.
Yeah, I think that's a really good assessment. I know that probably a lot of people would say that's not pessimistic enough on bonds, but I think that makes sense. That bonds and Bitcoin are essentially in a zero-sum game, and if Bitcoin's having a really bad year, then that probably means that bonds, or at least the returns or the yields on your bonds, are probably doing better, and vice versa. And so the Bitcoiners are like, oh, you had to buy all Bitcoin because bonds are in so much trouble, and so since it's in a zero-sum game, then Bitcoin benefits as bonds destroy themselves. And so I think what you're saying makes sense because that thesis, even if you think Bitcoin is a scam or you think it's going to die, that thesis has been has basically been validated that these things are inversely correlated, more or less. As monetary energy flows to Bitcoin, it's flowing out of bonds, and as it flows to bonds, it's flowing out of Bitcoin. So I think that makes a lot of sense to have a little both. If someone needs to have that emotional stability, and that perhaps having all in on Bitcoin is not the best decision for them from an emotional perspective. And I would add to that likewise, being all in bonds is probably should not be as comforting as people think it is, because then they have a 0% allocation to this inversely correlated hedge against it. So anyway, I think that's a good way to view it. That it's not just about the math, but it's also about how well can they sleep at night and how well they're able to manage their emotions in the face of volatility. So, yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's the Canadian Bitcoin Conference. It's in Toronto, right? It's June 17th and 18th. It's mostly it's geared towards new people, right? But I think there's going to be a lot of seasoned Bitcoin maxi veterans there too. It's completely separate from what I do there, so none of my clients know I'm involved with that, and that's actually the reason why I have the plate licking pleb name here. Basically, I'm not actually allowed to have an outside business activity with my role as a financial advisor, because I'm not supposed to be telling people to buy Bitcoin and stuff like that. So it's totally separate from that. That's why I'm not getting paid for my role there, because I'm too scared if I get caught, then I'll lose my job. So basically, I'm working for the conference for a free ticket. That's my payment.
How many hours does it take for an individual to understand Bitcoin? 10, 100, 1,000, more than 1,000. It takes a long time. And perhaps a single individual can never fully understand Bitcoin, but if there was a single resource to help a person better understand Bitcoin in a condensed format, for them, perhaps Bitcoin Evangelism, the book Bitcoin Evangelism, could be a good resource for them. The author is Brian DeMint. He's a friend of mine. I met him recently in Miami in person. We had been friends before that. And he sent me his book. I've started reading it, and I'm glad to say that he is sponsoring today's episode. And so to give you a brief word about his book and what makes it unique, is simply that most Bitcoin books are focused on Bitcoin and the merits for Bitcoin, but very few books venture out where other Bitcoin books dare not go and give readers a comprehensive understanding of the crypto market as well. See, Brian, the author of this book, was a former executive of a crypto project, and now obviously he's Bitcoin only, but he's able to give that perspective for people. And so it could fully flesh out for individuals why Bitcoin stands alone and why there is no second best. And so whether it's for you and trying to strengthen your own arguments against unregistered crypto securities or NFTs or whatever else you intend to not like, or perhaps you want to forward it to other people that you know that perhaps are caught up in that world and help explain to them why Bitcoin alone is unique compared to all these other things and orange pilling them. So whether it's for yourself and strengthening your own arguments, or for it's helping other people understand the merits of a Bitcoin only thesis, Bitcoin Evangelism could be a great read for you and for them. And so in sharpening arguments for Bitcoin and helping you tailor the Bitcoin message to your no-coiner friends in terms they can understand, which is very important, it makes a compelling case. Like I said, I've started reading it. It's pretty good. And so if you want to support me, if you want to enjoy a moral and articulate explanation of Bitcoin, Brian DeMint's book, Bitcoin Evangelism, could be a good place for you.
I'd like to take a brief moment and talk about the Bitcoin social layer, because today's sponsor of this podcast is the Orange Pill app. And the Orange Pill app is advancing and building that Bitcoin social layer as I speak here. In fact, I'm on the Orange Pill app. I joined it a couple months ago, and there are other Bitcoiners and plebs on there too. People like Safety and Moose, Natalie Brunell, Nate Savenholm, Daniel Prince, BTC Sessions, and other Bitcoiners and plebs are on there too and joining all the time. And so the social layer is really important, because while online connections are essential and they're needed and a critical piece of bringing Bitcoin mass adoption, in real life connections are only going to become more and more important into the future and a larger catalyst for being Bitcoin's circular economy and for Bitcoin's adoption. And so with the Orange Pill app, you can find Bitcoiners near you so that you can make those in-person Bitcoin connections and those Bitcoin friends. And one of the cool features is that you don't just find people near you, but also you can find Bitcoiners when you travel somewhere. So like recently, for example, I went to Boston and now I'm going to Miami here soon. And I'm glad to say that I've met Bitcoiners through the Orange Pill app directly and also indirectly through people I met through the Orange Pill app. So it's been something that's been useful to me personally. And so if you're going to be on the road too, you might be able to find Bitcoiners from where you're headed even before you get there. So, and additionally, Orange Pill app not only gives you people to meet, but it's also the world's largest repository for Bitcoin only events. So you might be able to find cool places to hang out and not just Bitcoiners alone. So we all know that social networks and network effects have value. And so everyone that is joining the Orange Pill app makes it only stronger and stronger into the future. So I would consider joining the Orange Pill app today and get one step closer to mass adoption and expanding your Bitcoin network. So Orange Pill app is available on Android, iOS. For your consideration. Appreciate your time. Let's get back to the show.
Can you tell me more about the conference coming up? We've been talking mostly about your financial advisory background. I'd like to hear more about the conference since we haven't talked too much about that yet. Could you explain a little bit what that's going to look like, what the target audience is, what the target group is, and what are the topics that will be covered there? Obviously, Bitcoin's the major factor of the conference, but if you could just give us a rundown what that looks like, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. So it's the Canadian Bitcoin Conference. So on Twitter, it's at CDN Bitcoin Conf. So it's June 17th and 18th. So it's like 5.5 weeks away from now. Toronto, Ontario, right? It's at the Chelsea Hotel and Conference Center. Basically, it's going to be basically like a more intimate conference than the major one people know about, right? Like the Pacific Bitcoin or Miami. We're probably going to have like there's 400 max capacity, right? So we'll probably sell 350 tickets plus all the speakers and volunteers and things like that. So it's much more intimate, right? You're going to be able to meet people and get to know people a little bit there. But there's a lot going on, right? So kind of, I guess the slogan, I guess, is for Bitcoiners, from Bitcoiners, high signal, low noise, Bitcoin only, right? So a lot of other conferences, have altcoin sponsors and things like that. So we've turned all of that down so it could be exclusively a Bitcoin only. But it's going to be a great time. We got a ton of great Bitcoiners in Canada. We're flying in a lot of people from the States, and making that work out too. So the Chelsea Hotel is, if you know the area, it's Yonge and Gerrard, which is right by the Eaton Centre, which is like the big mall in Toronto, right downtown. So there's tons of epic restaurants and bars and everything around there. There's going to be like a pre-party on the Friday night, which is more of like an educational thing. That'll be a much smaller crowd, maybe like 50 or 100 people. And that's where you'll be there too, uh, educating some newer plebs, which is generally the target market for kind of who we're going after with this conference. But that said, I'd guess that most of the attendees are more maxis, right? People that already know about Bitcoin, who have been in Bitcoin for a number of years, who just kind of want to congregate and meet other Canadian Bitcoiners and kind of be involved in what's going on in Canada and in the Bitcoin world. But yeah, lots of stuff going on. So there's workshops, right? We have BTC sessions doing a cold card workshop, where he's actually taking people through and showing you, how you get your Bitcoin cold storage and safely hold your own keys. We have a workshop on like just a regular intro to Bitcoin. There is a Noster workshop, which I guess is probably the furthest thing from Bitcoin that will be covered. But speakers talking on macro, financial services and regulation with regards to Bitcoin and mining regulation in Canada. We have a couple people who are Bitcoiners, but also into real estate, also into gold. So there'll be a little bit of talk, probably not much about gold, but I think there's going to be one talk. The working title is real estate a shitcoin? So I think we're going to have people kind of arguing for and against on the real estate side. So that'll be kind of neat. We're trying to get someone to talk about ordinals before it got as controversial as it is now. So before the fees were really high and everything like that, we wanted to get someone in to talk about ordinals, but now it's like nobody even wants to touch it. They're like, no, I don't want to talk about it. I'd rather pretend it doesn't exist now. Don't want to be associated with that type of thing. But the whole thing is going to be a little bit more, open forum. So if there's a speaker talking, and you have a question, we want to make it so that there's a microphone for you, right? And you can ask your question, put up your hand, and be a little bit interactive like that, without slowing the whole event down and everything like that, of course. But there's going to be space for sponsors. There's going to be some art there for sale. People with starting companies and just getting exposure are going to be there, sponsoring and selling their books and things like that, signing their books, posing for photos, that type of thing. But I wrote down a list of speakers I'll just kind of put through. The top one I have here, do you know these guys? Do you know Joey and Len, the Canadian Bitcoiners podcast? You should go on there. I'm gonna DM you their info. You should go on their podcast. It's like the Canadian Bitcoin podcast. But you should go. So they're going to be there, interviewing people, and I think they're doing a live show from the conference too. But I'm going to connect you guys because you'd be good on their podcast. They're good. They're good interviewers. But yeah, so we're gonna have Greg Foss there, Tomer Strolight, Francis Pulio from Bull Bitcoin. Bull is also the headline sponsor. So really excited to meet him. He lives in Costa Rica, so he hasn't been back to Canada in like years or something like that. So we're pulling him out of the jungle to come speak, and he's going to be at the after party on the Saturday too. And he's a real toxic, awesome guy that I'm excited to meet. Then we got Eric Yakes. I don't know if you read the Seventh Property. He's the author there, so he's coming up from I think he's in Denver or something like that. We've got Derek Ross, BTC Sessions, who I already mentioned. Frank Holmes, who is the CEO of Hive Mining, which is, I believe, the largest publicly traded miner in Canada. So Hive Mining. We have Ali Hammam. I don't know if you know there's Tahini's. That's the it's like shawarma and stuff like that, a restaurant, but they went on the Bitcoin standard as a business in 2020. And like we're all over the news at that time. Like I think Saylor was talking about them and everything like that. And they went from like 3 locations in the beginning of 2021 to now they have like 25 locations. So they're just growing so fast. So he's going to be there talking about Bitcoin and business. We actually have a member of parliament, so Ben Lobb, who's a politician in Canada, and he'll be speaking. We have Lawrence Lepard. I think he's actually going to be doing a session with Greg Foss, kind of talking about, macro, and I'm sure a lot of it's funny when you talk about what are people going to be talking about, it can change so much because so much happens so fast in the Bitcoin world. It's like 2 weeks ago, ordinals was a funny, interesting thing to talk about. Now it's like, okay, you can't talk about ordinals now. Then we have a couple real estate guys. They're brothers, Nick and Tom Karadza, who run Rockstar Real Estate, which is I believe one of the biggest real estate brokerages in Canada. So they'll be good to talk about Bitcoin and real estate. We have you coming there, which I'm also excited for after I heard you on Preston Pish. Thought, okay, we need to get Luke Broyles. I think the newest person we announced is Stefan Livera. So he'll be coming in too to speak, which is a big one. But basically it's going to be an awesome event where Bitcoiners are kind of getting together and learning from each other, networking, and partying after the fact. So it's going to be a great time. Really excited to meet everybody and put it all together. So it's the Saturday and the Sunday, half a day on the Sunday. The neat event that's happening kind of after the conference on the Sunday is we have a company called Decentral who has sponsored, and they're bringing in the parts so you can build your own miner. So they're going to kind of do step by step, put together your own miner, learn how to do that. So that'll be really cool. And there's just events where you can learn stuff like that. learn from each other, which is I think a big theme that we'll see on the weekend of.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of people. I didn't know all about a lot of those folks. That's really cool. And quite the variety too, which I think that's something that is always nice when you have a variety of backgrounds and a variety of interests and talking points. I think that's going to be really good. Variety of age, of ages. You got the young guy, and then you have some more matured, experienced folks, and I think that's great. Variety of experience, variety of backgrounds. So, um, yeah, that sounds really great. I'm excited to meet you. I'm excited to meet everyone else there. I guess before we go, do you have any last thoughts for people as they're thinking about Bitcoin, thinking about the future, or they're thinking about where to learn? Because obviously, a big part of what you do is teaching people and helping them learn. I guess, do you have any words of wisdom for people as they continue down their own journey of learning, not just about Bitcoin, but about the world and about money and about the nature of value itself? What life advice do you have for people?
Yeah. So life advice, I'm young too, right? So I'm not in the biggest position to give a ton of life advice, but I would say to keep an open mind, keep learning. I would say to put yourself out there, right? Take risks. Don't worry about getting embarrassed, right, or failing, right? You should fail as much as you can. Put yourself out there, make mistakes, because that's how you learn from it, right? Basically, 2 years ago today, I didn't know one Bitcoiner, had never met an IRL Bitcoiner, and then just decided to start a meetup, and it's led to the most amazing things. Like Lawrence Lepard gave me his cell phone number on Twitter yesterday and said, "Oh yeah, let's hook up after the conference and have a couple drinks." So it's like just put yourself out there because you never know where it's going to lead. So I think you should go out there, and if you want to do something, just try it, right? And if you fail, whatever. At least you tried. Um, a little bit more specific, I would say just try and find your own little local Bitcoin social node. So try and find, 5, 10, 15 people in your area who are Bitcoiners who you can get to trust a little bit, and communicate with and, dissect things and stuff like that. Because when you have a question about what to do to do XYZ on Sparrow Wallet or something like that, it's really helpful to know people that you can kind of talk to directly. Sometimes Twitter can't provide that. So I'd say to do that. And then beyond that, just go to CanadianBitcoinConf.com. Click on buy your tickets. It's going to be a great time. You can follow at CDN Bitcoin Conf. You can get me at @plateliquor_21M. But other than that, I think that's the limited wisdom I have to provide for you guys.
Well, appreciate it. Limited wisdom is still wisdom, so it's still good to have that reminder. So, thanks for your time. Looking forward to being at the conference, meeting you, and being a part of that. And yeah, thanks.